Hello, I'm Sleepy War Doctor, and welcome back. Tonight, we're traveling back to the summer of 1914, where you'll experience what life was really like as an ordinary German soldier during the First World War. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always enjoy seeing just how far these stories travel around the world. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, perhaps pull up a blanket, and let your mind drift back more than a century. It's the summer of 1914. The morning air is cool as you step outside your family's home in a small German town. The streets are unusually busy. Neighbors gather in small groups, quietly discussing alarming news that has spread across Europe over the past few weeks. Only a month ago, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo seemed like another distant political crisis. Now, one declaration of war has become another. Austria-Hungary has declared war on Serbia. Russia has begun mobilizing its enormous army. France prepares its own forces. Britain watches closely. Across Europe, governments exchange telegrams at a frantic pace, while millions of ordinary people wonder whether peace can still be saved. Then the church bells begin ringing. Not for a wedding, not for a holiday, for mobilization. Germany is going to war. At first, the atmosphere feels strangely optimistic. Many people genuinely believe the conflict will be over within a few months. Some newspapers confidently predict that the soldiers will be home before Christmas. Young men gather in the town square, smiling for photographs before boarding trains. Bands play patriotic songs. Children wave small German flags. Parents try to hide their worry behind encouraging smiles. You stand among hundreds of other recruits waiting outside the local railway station. Most of you have never fired a rifle outside basic military practice. Very few have ever traveled far from home. None of you can imagine what the next 4 years will become. An officer walks down the line, reading names from a clipboard. When he calls yours, you step forward. Just like that, your ordinary civilian life comes to an end. Before leaving, you embrace your parents. Your mother tries to remain composed, smoothing wrinkles from your coat one last time. Your father shakes your hand firmly before pulling you into a brief embrace. Neither of them says very much. There are no perfect words for moments like this. Nearby, wives kiss their husbands goodbye. Children cling tightly to fathers who promise they'll return soon. Friends exchange nervous smiles while pretending not to notice the fear in each other's eyes. Everyone wants to believe this will be a short adventure. History, however, has very different plans. The whistle of the locomotive echoes across the station. Steam billows into the cool morning air. One by one, young recruits climb aboard wooden railway carriages already crowded with men wearing freshly issued uniforms. You find an empty seat beside the window. As the train slowly begins moving, the familiar streets of your hometown drift past. The church, the bakery, the schoolhouse, the fields you've walked through since childhood. You don't know it yet, but it will be years before you see any of them again. The train gathers speed, carrying thousands of hopeful young men toward a future none of them can truly imagine. Some sing patriotic songs. Others laugh and tell stories. A few quietly stare out the window in silence. You do the same. Outside, Germany's countryside stretches peacefully beneath the summer sun. Farmers continue harvesting their fields. Children play beside rivers. Villages pass by one after another. Everything looks perfectly normal. It's difficult to believe that an entire continent is quietly marching toward one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. As the rhythmic sound of steel wheels rolls beneath the train, you settle back into your wooden seat. The journey has only just begun, and somewhere far to the west, beyond these peaceful fields, the trenches of the First World War are waiting. The train rolls steadily through the German countryside for most of the day. At nearly every station, more recruits climb aboard. Some are barely old enough to shave. Others are older reservists who completed their military service years ago and never imagined they would wear a uniform again. By evening, every carriage is crowded. Wooden benches designed for a handful of passengers now hold twice that number. No one seems to mind. The excitement of departure still fills the air. Someone begins singing a patriotic marching song. Soon an entire carriage joins in. The rhythm of the train becomes part of the music. Outside, fields gradually give way to larger towns, where cheering crowds gather beside the tracks. Women hand baskets of bread and fruit through open windows whenever the train pauses. Schoolchildren wave flags while shouting words of encouragement. The atmosphere feels almost festive. It is difficult to imagine that this same railway will one day carry wounded soldiers home instead. Late that night, your train finally reaches a large military training depot. The platform is illuminated by rows of lanterns. Officers stand waiting beside stacks of equipment, while clerks hurriedly record the names of every arriving recruit. The orderly efficiency is impressive. Germany had prepared for mobilization long before the first shot was fired. Within minutes, your civilian clothes are exchanged for military issue. First comes a rough wool tunic in field gray. The fabric feels heavy compared to the clothes you've worn all your life. Matching trousers follow, along with thick wool socks and sturdy leather boots that still feel stiff from the factory. Then comes the piece of equipment everyone recognizes immediately. The Pickelhaube, the famous leather helmet with its polished brass spike rising from the top. It looks impressive, parade-worthy, a symbol of the Imperial German Army. What you don't yet realize is that the helmet offers very little protection against the steel fragments that dominate modern warfare. Within a few years, many soldiers will replace it with the much safer Stahlhelm, the steel helmet that would become one of the most recognizable helmets of the 20th century. For now, however, the Pickelhaube remains part of your new identity. Next comes your rifle, the Gewehr 98. Over 4 feet long, beautifully machined, and weighing just over 4 kilograms. The instructor places it carefully into your hands. This, he says firmly, will become your closest companion. You spend the next several hours learning every part of it. How to load it, how to clean it, how to disassemble the bolt, how to fix a bayonet to the barrel. Every movement is repeated until it becomes automatic. The instructors waste very little time. Germany expects discipline, precision, efficiency. Mistakes are corrected immediately. One recruit fumbles while presenting his rifle. The sergeant says nothing. He simply makes the young man repeat the movement again, and again, and again, until every motion is perfectly smooth. You quickly learn that military life runs according to the clock. A bugle sounds before sunrise. Breakfast lasts only a short time. Drill follows drill. March after march. Hours are spent learning how to move together as one unit rather than as individuals. Your shoulders ache from carrying your rifle. Your boots rub painfully against your heels. The heavy wool uniform feels surprisingly warm beneath the August sun. By evening, you're exhausted. Yet as you lie in your bunk that first night, surrounded by dozens of strangers breathing quietly in the darkness, a strange thought crosses your mind. Just yesterday, you were an ordinary civilian. Today, you belong to one of the largest armies in Europe. And tomorrow, training will begin all over again. Because before you can face the trenches of France, Germany intends to turn every recruit into a soldier. The following weeks settle into a rhythm that soon feels inescapable. Every morning begins before sunrise. A bugle pierces the quiet air, and within minutes, dozens of recruits are scrambling from their bunks. Blankets are folded with precise corners. Boots are polished until they shine. Uniforms are brushed free of dust before anyone dares step outside. The sergeants notice everything. A loose button, an untidy bed, a belt fastened one hole too loosely. Nothing escapes their attention. At first, it feels exhausting. Later, you begin to understand why. An army depends upon habits. If a soldier learns to ignore small mistakes during training, he may ignore far more dangerous ones during battle. The instructors constantly remind you that discipline saves lives. Whether or not that's true, you certainly become disciplined. Most of each day is spent marching, not through muddy trenches or shell-torn battlefields. Through quiet German countryside, the platoon marches for miles carrying full equipment. Your backpack alone weighs more than 20 kilograms. Inside are spare clothing, ammunition pouches, cooking equipment, a mess tin, personal items, and a rolled blanket strapped tightly across the top. The first few marches leave your shoulders aching. The leather straps dig painfully into your back. Your boots feel far heavier than when you first put them on. Several recruits develop painful blisters before the first week is over. The medics quickly offer simple advice. Take care of your feet. At first, the instruction seems almost amusing. Surely rifles and tactics matter far more than sore feet. Months later, you'll understand that healthy feet can mean the difference between reaching safety or being left behind. Between marches, the instructors teach marksmanship. Rows of recruits kneel behind wooden targets, carefully aiming their Gur 98 rifles downrange. The rifle is remarkably accurate. Its long barrel and powerful cartridge allow skilled marksmen to hit distant targets with surprising consistency. Every shot must count. Unlike later wars, automatic weapons remain relatively rare for ordinary infantry. Most German soldiers still depend upon careful, deliberate rifle fire. The instructors emphasize accuracy over speed. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Again and again, those words are repeated. Bayonet practice follows. Long steel blades are fixed to the end of each rifle before recruits charge at straw-filled dummies standing across the training field. The exercise feels dramatic, almost theatrical. The sergeants shout commands while recruits thrust forward in unison. Yet even during training, you notice something curious. The officers spend far more time teaching marksmanship than bayonet fighting. Modern war, they explain, is changing. Rifles, machine guns, heavy artillery, these will decide most battles. Not heroic charges with fixed bayonets. By late afternoon, exhaustion settles over the entire camp. Uniforms are soaked with sweat. Faces are streaked with dust. Hands smell faintly of gun oil after another long session cleaning rifles. Every evening ends the same way. Weapons are inspected. Equipment checked. Boots cleaned. No exceptions. The rifle resting beside your bunk has already begun feeling strangely familiar. You've learned every scratch in the wooden stock, every click of the bolt, every movement required to load 5 rounds into the internal magazine. It no longer feels like unfamiliar military equipment. It feels like part of your daily routine. Then, one cool morning, the training suddenly changes. Instead of reporting to the parade ground, your platoon is ordered to pack everything you own. No extra equipment is left behind. Every blanket, every cartridge, every personal belonging goes into your pack. The instructors no longer speak about future lessons. Training, they announce, is complete. Your regiment has received new orders. You're leaving for the Western Front. The Real journey is about to begin. Before dawn, the camp is unusually quiet. There are no rifle drills, no marching practice, no sergeant shouting corrections across the parade ground. Instead, hundreds of soldiers move silently between the barracks, packing their final belongings into heavy canvas backpacks. The mood has changed. Training felt like preparation. This feels real. After a quick breakfast of dark bread, sausage, and hot coffee, your company forms up outside the camp gates. The officers walk slowly along the ranks, checking uniforms one final time. Boots polished, belts tight, rifles clean. No one speaks unless spoken to. Then comes the simple command. Forward. Your boots strike the road together as the regiment marches toward the railway station. The townspeople are already waiting. Many wave small Imperial German flags. Some clap politely as the soldiers pass. Others simply watch in silence. An elderly woman hands apples to several young recruits standing near the front of the column. A baker distributes warm loaves of bread wrapped in cloth. One little boy salutes every passing soldier with complete seriousness. His father gently smiles. You wonder if the boy understands where all these men are going. Probably not. Perhaps that's for the best. At the station, long military trains stretch farther than you can see. Freight wagons carry horses. Flat cars transport artillery pieces covered with canvas. Passenger coaches fill rapidly with infantry. The entire station seems to move with remarkable efficiency. Germany's railway network has become one of its greatest military strengths. Every train departs according to a carefully prepared timetable. Thousands of soldiers, thousands of horses, millions of rounds of ammunition, everything moving west. You climb aboard another wooden carriage, finding a seat beside the same comrades you've trained with for weeks. The atmosphere is noticeably quieter than your first journey. Back then, everyone sang songs. Now, most simply look out the windows. The train begins rolling forward. Hour after hour, it crosses western Germany. Large cities give way to rolling farmland, then forests, then villages crowded with soldiers marching in the opposite direction. Everywhere you look, uniforms fill the landscape. The deeper you travel toward the frontier, the more obvious the scale of mobilization becomes. Entire roads are occupied by marching columns. Horse-drawn wagons creak beneath enormous loads of supplies. Ambulance carts already begin moving east. Seeing them makes something inside you shift. Until now, war has still felt distant. Those ambulances remind you that somewhere ahead, the fighting has already begun. Late that afternoon, the train slows near the Belgian border. The conductor quietly announces that civilian traffic no longer continues beyond this point. From here onward, everything belongs to the military. The landscape outside the window has changed. Instead of peaceful villages preparing for harvest, you now see damaged railway stations, freshly dug defensive positions, bridges guarded by armed sentries, columns of smoke rising faintly on the distant horizon. Nobody points them out. Nobody needs to. One soldier quietly whispers, "Is that the front?" An older reservist shakes his head. No. He keeps looking out the window. The front is still farther. The answer offers little comfort. As evening approaches, the train finally stops beside a temporary unloading station built only a few miles behind the lines. The air feels different. You notice it immediately. The distant sound reaches you first. A low, rolling thunder. Not from storm clouds. From artillery. The guns are still many miles away. Yet each explosion travels effortlessly across the countryside. Boom. Several seconds pass. Then another. Boom. The rhythm continues without pause. You step down from the train, tightening your grip on your rifle almost without thinking. For the first time since leaving home, you can hear the war. And by tomorrow, you won't just hear it. You'll be living inside it. The following morning begins long before sunrise. You barely sleep. Not because the ground is uncomfortable, because the distant artillery never truly stops. All night long, the guns have spoken across the countryside. Sometimes a single deep boom echoes across the darkness. Sometimes dozens fire together, merging into one long, rolling roar that seems to shake the very earth beneath your blanket. By dawn, you've almost grown used to it. Almost. After a hurried breakfast of black bread and hot coffee, your company forms into marching columns once again. Unlike the cheerful roads back in Germany, these roads feel different. Everywhere you look, the landscape carries signs of war. Trees have been shattered by shellfire. Stone farmhouses stand abandoned, their windows broken and roofs collapsed. Fields that should be filled with wheat now bear deep craters filled with muddy rainwater. The smell changes too. Instead of fresh-cut grass and damp earth, the air carries faint traces of smoke, burned wood, and something metallic you can't quite identify. The closer you move toward the front, the quieter everyone becomes. Conversation fades naturally. Nobody orders silence. It simply happens. Several miles later, you begin passing soldiers marching in the opposite direction. They don't look like the confident recruits who boarded trains only weeks earlier. Their uniforms are faded beneath layers of dried mud. Many haven't shaved in days. Some carry bandaged arms. Others limp slightly as they walk. One man looks no older than 20, yet his tired eyes seem decades older. As your company passes, neither group says much. One exhausted veteran simply looks at your polished pickelhaube and gives the faintest shake of his head. Not with disrespect, almost with sympathy. You don't understand why. Not yet. Around midday, the road narrows until it disappears beneath rows of camouflage netting. An officer quietly explains that enemy observers occasionally watch these routes through binoculars. From now on, every movement is made more carefully. Eventually, the road ends altogether. Ahead lies a narrow communication trench, zigzagging through the earth like a giant scar stretching toward the horizon. You climb down a rough wooden ladder into it. Immediately, everything changes. The air feels cooler, damper. The walls rise well above your head, packed tightly from layers of clay and sandbags. Wooden planks, known as duckboards, line the muddy floor beneath your boots. Without them, you'd sink ankle-deep into the thick mud after every rainfall. The trench is narrower than you imagined. In many places, two soldiers can barely pass each other without turning sideways. Telephone wires run along one wall. Shelves carved into the earth hold ammunition boxes, water cans, and medical supplies. Every few hundred yards, the trench bends sharply. The officer explains this isn't accidental. If an artillery shell lands nearby, the zigzag shape helps prevent explosions from tearing through the entire trench at once. Even the design reflects years of hard-earned experience. As you continue walking, you notice faces watching quietly from dugouts built into the trench walls. Veterans. Most barely glance up as your company passes. One calmly cleans his rifle. Another carefully mends a torn boot. A third quietly writes a letter beneath the dim light of a candle. For them, this has become ordinary life. Then you reach the firing line. A sergeant motions for you to climb onto the wooden firing step built against the front wall. Carefully, you raise your head just high enough to look over the sandbags. Before you stretches a barren landscape unlike anything you've ever seen. The ground is scarred by thousands of shell craters. Broken tree trunks rise from the earth like blackened skeletons. Twisted barbed wire stretches endlessly across the muddy wasteland. Far in the distance, almost hidden beneath another line of sandbags, lies the enemy trench. It is closer than you expected, only a few hundred meters away. For a long moment, neither side fires. The battlefield is strangely quiet, almost peaceful. Then, somewhere down the line, a rifle cracks. Another answers. Moments later, a machine gun rattles briefly before falling silent once more. The war has introduced itself, not with a great charge, not with dramatic music, but with quiet tension. Standing there, looking across the empty stretch of no man's land, you realize something that no training exercise could ever teach. This trench will be your home. The first thing you learn about life in the trenches is that it is surprisingly routine. Before arriving, you imagined constant fighting, endless charges across no man's land, bullets flying every minute. The reality is far quieter, and somehow, far more exhausting. Your day begins nearly an hour before sunrise. Every soldier in the trench is awakened while the sky is still dark. No one complains. Everyone understands the reason. Dawn and dusk are the most dangerous moments of the day. Military commanders call this stand to. Every available soldier climbs onto the firing step with his rifle loaded, scanning the darkness beyond the barbed wire. The belief is simple. If the enemy intends to attack, these are the hours they are most likely to choose. For nearly an hour, both trench lines remain on high alert. Nobody speaks above a whisper. You listen carefully. The distant chirping of birds, the occasional rumble of artillery, a shovel striking earth somewhere far down the trench, and every so often, the sharp crack of a rifle reminding everyone that the front never truly sleeps. As daylight slowly spreads across the battlefield, the immediate danger begins to pass. Breakfast follows. Calling it breakfast may be generous. Today, your meal consists of coarse black bread, a bowl of thin soup, and a cup of coffee substitute made from roasted barley. Real coffee is rare this close to the front. Still, anything warm is appreciated. You quickly discover that food tastes better simply because you're hungry. After breakfast, the real work begins. Much of a soldier's day has nothing to do with fighting. Instead, you're repairing the trench itself. Sandbags damaged by rain are replaced. Collapsed sections of earth are dug out with shovels. Wooden duckboards are lifted and cleaned before sinking permanently beneath the mud. Drainage ditches must remain open. Otherwise, after a single heavy rainstorm, the trench becomes a waist-deep river. The officers constantly remind everyone, the trench is as important as your rifle. If you don't maintain it, it won't protect you. By late morning, your uniform is already damp. Not from rain, from hard work. The trench walls constantly shed loose clay. Mud clings stubbornly to your boots. No matter how carefully you step, it seems impossible to stay clean. One veteran notices you trying to scrape mud from your boots. He smiles faintly. You'll stop caring in a few days. He's probably right. Around midday, another ration party arrives from the rear, carrying food, ammunition, and fresh water. The supplies travel through narrow communication trenches under cover of darkness whenever possible. Moving openly during daylight invites enemy artillery. Every loaf of bread, every crate of ammunition, every bucket of drinking water. Someone carried it here by hand. That realization makes you appreciate every meal a little more. The afternoon passes with more maintenance. Cleaning rifles, repairing firing positions, filling empty sandbags. Occasionally, an officer peers over the parapet through binoculars, carefully watching the enemy trenches. Most of the time, very little happens. Then, without warning, a single enemy shell whistles overhead. Everyone freezes. The explosion lands somewhere behind your trench with a dull, earth-shaking thud. Dirt rains gently from the walls. Silence follows. Nobody panics. The veterans barely look up. One calmly continues cleaning his rifle. Another resumes writing a letter home. Their calmness surprises you. Until one soldier quietly says, "If they fire one shell." He shrugs. They're probably adjusting their aim. You suddenly realize why nobody celebrated after the explosion. One shell is rarely the problem. It's the dozens that sometimes follow. Fortunately, today, no more arrive. As evening approaches, another stand-to begins. The same careful routine. The same silent watch across no man's land. The same uneasy feeling that somewhere beyond the fading light. Hundreds of French and British soldiers are doing exactly the same thing. When darkness finally settles over the battlefield, you climb down from the firing step and make your way toward a small dugout carved into the trench wall. Tonight, you'll sleep underground, if the artillery allows it. You quickly discover that the greatest enemy in the trenches is not always the opposing army. Sometimes, it's simply the trench itself. You wake before dawn after your first night underground. The dugout offered some protection from the wind, but little comfort. A rough wooden bunk, a damp blanket, the constant smell of wet earth filling the cramped space. At some point during the night, another artillery barrage echoed somewhere down the line. You remember opening your eyes for a moment, waiting, listening, then eventually drifting back to sleep. The veterans hardly reacted at all. After enough weeks here, they explain, you learn the difference between shells falling nearby and shells falling somewhere else. Breakfast is served shortly after stand-to. The same dark bread, the same thin soup, the same hot drink that only vaguely resembles coffee. As you eat, something brushes against your boot. At first, you assume it's another soldier squeezing through the narrow trench. Then you look down. A rat, not a small field mouse, a large brown rat, almost the size of a cat. It pauses for only a second before disappearing beneath a stack of sandbags. The soldier beside you barely glances at it. You'll see dozens today. He isn't exaggerating. The trenches are filled with rats. The constant supply of discarded food attracts them. The shelter of dugouts allows them to breed rapidly. Some grow astonishingly large after months living among the trenches. At night, they dart between sleeping soldiers, searching for scraps of bread or anything else they can eat. Occasionally, they chew through packs or blankets. Nobody likes them. Nobody can get rid of them. The rats simply become another part of trench life. As unpleasant as they are, the lice may be worse. Several days after arriving, you begin scratching your neck, then your shoulders, then your waist. Soon almost everyone in the platoon is doing the same. Tiny body lice have made themselves at home inside the seams of your wool uniform. The itching becomes almost constant. Whenever there's a quiet moment, soldiers remove their tunics and carefully inspect the stitching. One veteran casually crushes several lice between his fingernails. He doesn't even seem annoyed anymore. It's impossible, he sighs. You kill 10. He shrugs. 20 more appear. The officers occasionally arrange delousing stations behind the lines where uniforms are steamed to kill the insects. The relief never lasts very long. Within days, the lice usually return. Then there's the mud. No amount of training could have prepared you for it. After several days of steady rain, the trench floor begins disappearing beneath thick brown water. The duckboards help, but not everywhere. Sometimes one shifts beneath your weight. Your boot sinks ankle deep into cold mud before you can pull it free. Other times, the mud reaches your calves. Moving through the trench becomes slow, exhausting work. Every step feels heavier than the last. By evening, your boots seem to weigh twice as much as they did that morning. The older soldiers constantly repeat one piece of advice. Take your boots off whenever you can. At first, it sounds strange. Later, a medic explains why. Feet that remain cold and wet for too long begin losing circulation. The skin softens, swells, eventually turning pale and numb. The condition is called trench foot. Left untreated, it can become so severe that soldiers lose toes, or even entire feet. Every evening, if the situation allows, you remove your boots, dry your socks, rub your feet vigorously to restore circulation. It becomes one of the most important routines of your day, not because it's comfortable, because ignoring it could end your war without a single bullet ever being fired. As darkness falls once again over the Western Front, the rain begins tapping softly against the sandbags above your dugout. A rat scurries somewhere nearby. You absent-mindedly scratch another itch beneath your collar. Only a week ago, these things would have seemed unbearable. Now, they're simply part of another ordinary day in the trenches. And you quietly wonder what other hardships you'll soon begin calling normal. After several days in the trench, you begin noticing something unsettling. Most of the veterans rarely talk about enemy rifles. They hardly mention bayonet charges. Even machine guns receive surprisingly little attention. Instead, whenever new soldiers arrive, they all offer the same piece of advice. If you hear artillery, they pause. Respect it. It doesn't take long to understand why. One quiet afternoon, you're helping repair a collapsed section of trench wall. The weather is unusually pleasant. Sunlight filters through scattered clouds. Someone is humming softly while filling fresh sandbags. For a few precious moments, the war feels strangely distant. Then you hear it. A faint sound, almost like tearing fabric somewhere high above. One of the older soldiers freezes instantly. His face changes. Incoming. The word echoes down the trench. Everyone moves at once. You throw yourself against the trench wall as quickly as possible. Less than 2 seconds later, the shell explodes. The ground shakes violently beneath your boots. A tremendous roar fills the air. Mud, splintered wood, and chunks of earth rain down from every direction. For a brief moment, you can't hear anything. Only a high-pitched ringing inside your ears. The explosion landed 50 meters away, close enough to feel, far enough to survive. As the dust slowly settles, another whistle cuts through the air. Then another. This time, The shells arrive closer together. Boom, boom, boom. The barrage has begun. For the next several minutes, the world seems to disappear beneath explosions. Each detonation sends another wave of earth crashing into the trench. Sandbags burst apart. Wooden supports crack. Clouds of thick clay fill the narrow passage until breathing itself becomes difficult. You crouch low, your steel-gray uniform quickly disappearing beneath layers of dirt. There is nothing to shoot, nothing to charge, nothing to fight. Only waiting. Waiting for the next shell. And hoping it lands somewhere else. Between explosions, the veterans remain surprisingly calm. One quietly checks the dugout entrance to make sure it hasn't collapsed. Another helps a younger soldier whose hands are trembling uncontrollably. Nobody wastes energy shouting. Everyone has learned that panic serves no purpose. Eventually, almost as suddenly as it began, the shelling stops. Silence returns. Not complete silence. Just the ordinary sounds of the front. Distant rifles. A machine gun somewhere along the line. Someone coughing inside a nearby dugout. Slowly, soldiers climb back onto the firing step to check for damage. The trench no longer looks quite the same. Several sections have partially collapsed. Fresh craters scar the ground behind the lines. Telephone wires hang loose where explosions snapped them apart. Repair. Work begins immediately. Because another lesson becomes clear very quickly. The trench is never truly finished. Every barrage changes it. Every storm weakens it. Every day demands more work. As you're helping shovel loose earth back into place, an older corporal notices you glancing toward the fresh crater left by one of the shells. He quietly says, "You know what scares people the most?" You assume he'll say artillery. He shakes his head. The waiting. He gestures toward the peaceful sky above. You never know when the next shell is coming. That uncertainty slowly becomes part of daily life. Every quiet afternoon, every peaceful sunrise, every warm meal could be interrupted without warning. Not by soldiers charging across no man's land, but by an enemy you never even see. Years later, historians would estimate that artillery caused the majority of battlefield casualties during the First World War. Not rifles, not bayonets, not machine guns. The giant guns positioned miles behind the front. Invisible, patient, always waiting. That evening, as darkness settles across the trench once again, you brush dried mud from your uniform before climbing into your dugout. Your ears are still ringing slightly from the afternoon barrage. The trench feels quieter now, but you understand something you didn't yesterday. Silence doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes, it's simply the pause before the next shell arrives. By the spring of 1915, a new fear spreads through the trenches. It isn't louder than artillery. It isn't faster than a rifle bullet. In fact, it often arrives almost silently. At first, you hear only rumors. Stories passed from one regiment to another. Whispers of strange green clouds drifting across the battlefield. Soldiers coughing uncontrollably. Entire trenches abandoned without a single shot being fired. Some dismiss the stories as exaggerations. War has a way of creating rumors. Then one evening, the rumors become reality. The day has been unusually calm. You spend most of it repairing duckboards damaged by another week of heavy rain. The enemy trench remains strangely quiet, almost too quiet. As dusk approaches, the wind begins blowing steadily from the enemy's direction toward your own lines. One of the older sergeants glances at the sky. He frowns. Without warning, a shout echoes down the trench. Gas. The word spreads faster than anything you've heard before. Gas. Gas. Every soldier immediately drops what he's doing. There is no confusion, no hesitation. Training takes over. You reach for the canvas satchel hanging at your side and pull out your gas mask. Your fingers fumble against the straps for just a moment. The veteran beside you grabs your shoulder. Faster. You pull the rubber mask over your face and tighten the straps behind your head. Almost immediately, your breathing becomes heavier. The thick lenses narrow your vision. Every breath echoes loudly inside the mask. Looking over the sandbags, you finally see it. A pale green cloud slowly rolling across no man's land. It doesn't move quickly. It doesn't need to. The wind carries it steadily forward. It slips through shell craters, around shattered tree trunks, across broken barbed wire, toward your trench. Within minutes, the first edge of the cloud reaches your position. The world disappears inside a strange green haze. Even through the mask, the smell is unpleasant, sharp, almost like strong bleach mixed with metal. The officers walk calmly along the trench, checking every soldier's mask. One recruit is still struggling with his straps. Without a word, a corporal rushes over and tightens them properly before moving on. There is no time for embarrassment, only survival. For nearly an hour, everyone waits. Speaking is almost impossible through the masks. Instead, soldiers communicate with hand signals and quick nods. The silence feels almost unnatural. Only the occasional artillery shell disturbs the eerie stillness. Eventually, the cloud begins drifting. Farther behind your trench, the order finally comes. Masks off. Fresh air has never smelled so wonderful. You pull the rubber mask away and take a long, careful breath. Around you, everyone does exactly the same. Several soldiers cough. Others simply sit quietly against the trench wall, exhausted. The attack has passed. This time, later that evening, one of the medical orderlies explains what happened. The gas released by the enemy was chlorine. When inhaled without protection, it attacks the lungs, making breathing increasingly difficult. Many of the earliest victims never understood what was happening until it was too late. Now, every soldier carries a gas mask at all times. It quickly becomes as essential as your rifle. You never walk anywhere without knowing exactly where it is. Even while sleeping, it remains within arm's reach. From that day onward, every strange smell makes you alert. Every unexpected breeze catches your attention. Every cry of gas sends your heart racing, even if it turns out to be a false alarm. The trenches have introduced yet another danger, one that cannot be seen until it's almost upon you. As darkness settles across the Western Front once again, you carefully inspect your gas mask before placing it beside your bunk. You check the straps, the lenses, the filter, then you check them a second time. Because after today, you understand something every veteran already knew. In the trenches, the deadliest enemy isn't always the one holding a rifle. Sometimes, it's the air itself. As dangerous as the trenches are during daylight, night brings an entirely different kind of fear. When the sun disappears beyond the shattered landscape, the battlefield changes. The constant rifle fire slows. Artillery becomes less frequent. A strange silence settles across the front. Not peaceful silence. Expectant silence. The officers call it no man's land for a reason. The strip of ground between the German and Allied trenches belongs to neither side. During the day, it is almost impossible to cross without drawing immediate fire. At night, it becomes the domain of patrols. One evening, shortly after sunset, your platoon sergeant quietly approaches. He reads several names from a notebook. Yours is among them. No speeches, no dramatic announcement, just a simple instruction. Patrol leaves in 20 minutes. Your stomach tightens. The veterans begin preparing almost immediately. Anything that might make noise is secured. Mess tins are wrapped tightly in cloth. Loose buttons are checked. Even rifle slings are adjusted to prevent metal buckles from rattling together. One soldier quietly rubs mud across the polished fittings of his rifle. Anything reflective could catch moonlight. Tonight, even a tiny flash might give away your position. Before climbing out of the trench, the patrol leader gathers everyone together. He speaks barely above a whisper. No talking. If you stop, stay stopped. If I raise my hand, so do you. Simple instructions. Everyone nods. One by one, the patrol climbs over the parapet using a small wooden ladder. For the first time since arriving at the front, you leave the safety of the trench behind. The ground beneath your boots feels uneven, soft, Every few steps, your feet sink into shell craters hidden beneath the darkness. The moon provides just enough light to reveal twisted strands of barbed wire stretching across the landscape like enormous spider webs. Broken tree stumps cast strange shadows across the churned earth. Nothing moves. At least, nothing you can see. The patrol advances slowly, sometimes only a few steps each minute. The only sounds are quiet breathing and the occasional distant owl somewhere beyond the battlefield. Then, the patrol leader suddenly freezes. His hand rises silently into the air. Everyone immediately drops to one knee. You hold your breath. Several seconds pass. Then you hear it. Voices. Faint. Speaking French. Somewhere ahead, an Allied patrol is moving through the darkness as well. Neither side knows exactly where the other is. Both groups stop, listening, waiting. The silence stretches on. You become acutely aware of your own heartbeat. Even breathing feels dangerously loud. Finally, the distant voices begin moving away. The patrol leader lowers his hand. Without a word, everyone continues forward. The objective tonight isn't to fight. It's to observe. The officers want information. Has the enemy repaired their barbed wire? Are new trenches being dug? Can fresh troop movements be seen? One veteran quietly studies the opposing trench through binoculars before making several notes in a small notebook. Every observation matters. Eventually, the patrol turns back toward the German lines. Crossing no man's land a second time somehow feels even longer than the first. Every shadow seems suspicious. Every broken branch sounds louder than it should. When the familiar outline of your own trench finally appears ahead, relief quietly spreads through the group. One by one, you climb back down into the safety of the firing trench. No shots were fired. No enemy was encountered face to face. Yet everyone seems exhausted. The sergeant gathers the patrol for a brief report before dismissing everyone to rest. As you remove your muddy boots inside the dugout, one of the older soldiers notices your expression. He smiles knowingly. The trenches are dangerous. He pauses. But out there, he nods toward the darkness beyond the sandbags. You never know who's watching. That night, sleep comes slowly, somewhere beyond the trench. Another patrol is probably moving through the darkness, listening, watching, just as your own had done only hours before. The war never truly sleeps. It merely grows quieter until dawn arrives once again. As autumn slowly fades into winter, the battlefield changes once again. The trees that somehow survived months of shellfire lose their final leaves. Cold winds sweep across no man's land without anything left to slow them. The rain becomes colder. The nights become longer. And the trenches become even more miserable. When you first arrived, you thought the mud couldn't possibly get any worse. Winter proves you wrong. Each morning begins the same way. Before dawn, you pull yourself from your blanket, your breath already visible in the freezing air. The walls of the dugout glisten with moisture. Your boots, carefully placed beside your bunk the night before, feel cold as stone. Putting them on is almost painful. The leather has stiffened overnight. The wool socks you dried as carefully as possible are still slightly damp. Nothing ever seems completely dry anymore. Outside, the trench has changed. Thin sheets of ice cover puddles between the duckboards. Water collected inside shell craters has frozen solid. The wooden firing step is slippery beneath your boots, forcing every soldier to move more carefully than usual. One careless step can easily end with a broken ankle. Stand-to begins as always. The entire company lines the trench while the eastern sky slowly brightens. Everyone stamps their feet against the cold, hands wrapped tightly around rifle stocks. Fingers already beginning to lose feeling despite thick wool gloves. The Gur 98 performs remarkably well in cold weather, but the bolt must be kept clean. Frozen mud or thick grease can slow its movement at the worst possible moment. Cleaning your rifle becomes even more important than before, not because you're expecting an attack, because the cold punishes carelessness. Breakfast offers little warmth. A bowl of hot soup, dark bread, if you're fortunate, a small piece of sausage. The cooks do everything they can. But keeping food hot while carrying it through miles of communication trenches is nearly impossible. Many meals arrive only lukewarm. Nobody complains. Warm or cold, food is food. The day's work continues despite the weather. Collapsed trench walls still need repairing. Sandbags still require replacing. Barbed wire must still be inspected. The war doesn't pause simply because winter has arrived. One afternoon, snow begins falling. Not heavily, just enough to dust the battlefield in white. For a brief moment, the Western Front looks almost peaceful. The shattered tree trunks, the broken barbed wire, the shell craters. Everything softens beneath a thin blanket of snow. One young recruit quietly smiles. It's beautiful. An older veteran nods. It is. Then he points toward the frozen ground. Until the shelling starts. He's right. The beauty lasts only a short while. Soon another artillery barrage tears fresh holes through the snow-covered earth, turning clean white fields back into churned mud and shattered ice. Winter brings another problem as well. Long nights. Darkness now arrives during the late afternoon. The patrols through no man's land grow colder. The wind cuts through heavy uniforms. Frost forms on helmet straps. Every breath creates small clouds drifting into the night air. Talking becomes even more dangerous. Not because of the sound, because the warm breath can sometimes be seen in the moonlight. The veterans quietly teach the younger soldiers another trick. Cover your mouth with your scarf. Breathe slowly. Little lessons, learned through experience. By Christmas, you've almost forgotten what warmth feels like. Your world has become one of frozen boots, steaming coffee, icy rifles, and endless gray skies. Yet despite everything, life continues. Someone still writes letters home. Someone still tells jokes around a tiny stove inside the dugout. Someone still shares the last piece of chocolate from a package received weeks earlier. The cold has made everyone uncomfortable. It has not taken away their humanity. As another freezing evening settles across the trenches, you pull your blanket tightly around your shoulders and listen to the wind howling softly above the dugout. Tomorrow, the snow may melt, or another storm may arrive. Either way, morning stand 2 will begin before sunrise. And another ordinary day on the Western Front will quietly begin once again. By the second winter of the war, you've begun measuring time differently. Not by months, not by seasons, but by letters. Some weeks, one arrives. Other weeks, none at all. The arrival of the field post has become one of the most anticipated moments in the trench. Late one afternoon, just as another round of trench repairs is coming to an end, a runner appears carrying a heavy canvas mailbag. Almost immediately, soldiers begin gathering. Even the veterans, who rarely show much excitement anymore, glance toward the bag with quiet hope. The company clerk begins reading names one by one. Each letter has traveled an incredible distance. Across Germany, through crowded railway stations, onto supply trains, then by wagon. Finally, carried by hand through miles of muddy communication trenches. Sometimes a letter written only a week earlier feels like it has crossed an entire world. When your name is finally called, you carefully take the envelope into your hands. The paper is slightly wrinkled. One corner is stained from the long journey. But you recognize the handwriting immediately. It's from home. You step into the dugout where it's quieter before carefully unfolding the letter. Your mother writes about ordinary things. The family garden. The harvest. Your younger brother beginning school. The neighbor finally repairing his old barn after years of talking about it. Nothing remarkable. And somehow, those ordinary details become the most remarkable things you've read in months. For a little while, the trench disappears. You can almost picture your hometown exactly as you left it. The church bell ringing across the square. The smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. The familiar road leading home. It feels both wonderfully close and impossibly far away. Around you, other soldiers are reading their own letters. One quietly smiles to himself. Another laughs softly after reading a joke sent by his sister. Across the dugout, a young recruit folds his letter without saying a word. Not everyone receives good news. Some learn of illness. Some hear of homes struggling through shortages. Others receive no letters at all. Those soldiers usually pretend it doesn't bother them. The veterans know better. That evening, after dinner, you decide to write a reply. The paper rests awkwardly across your knee while a candle flickers beside you. At first, you aren't sure what to say. Should you describe the rats? The mud? The endless shell fire? You decide not to. Instead, you write that you're healthy, that your friends are looking after one another, that you've received the package of warm socks. You thank your mother for the homemade biscuits, even though most of them crumbled during the journey. You don't mention the artillery. You don't mention the gas attacks. You certainly don't mention how frightened you sometimes feel during the night. Some things seem kinder left unwritten. Before sealing the envelope, you pause for a moment. You wonder how long it will take to reach home, whether your family will read it around the kitchen table, whether your younger brother will ask when you'll be coming back. You quietly write one final sentence. I hope to see you all again soon. You mean every word. The next morning, the finished letters are collected into another canvas mailbag. Soon they'll begin the long journey east, leaving the trenches, crossing the countryside, returning to peaceful towns where church bells still ring, children still play in the streets, and life continues beyond the battlefield. Watching the mail disappear down the communication trench, one veteran quietly smiles. The letters keep us alive. You look at him curiously. He shrugs. They remind us. He glances toward the gray sky above, that there's still a world waiting for us when this is over. For the first time in many weeks, you find yourself believing. Have disappeared. Trees stand stripped of every branch. The ground has become a sea of fresh craters, each filled with muddy water or broken timber. The air smells strongly of smoke and explosive powder. It feels as though the battlefield itself has been shattered into countless pieces. Progress is painfully slow. Every few hundred meters, another obstacle appears. Tangled barbed wire, collapsed trenches, shell holes deep enough to swallow entire squads. The mud clings to your boots with every step. Some places are so churned by artillery that the earth seems almost liquid beneath your feet. Then the rifle fire begins. Machine guns follow. Bullets snap overhead while everyone instinctively drops behind the nearest crater. The training takes over. Stay low. Move carefully. Never remain exposed longer than necessary. Hours pass. Sometimes your company advances. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it simply lies motionless while artillery once again pounds the ground ahead. By evening, you've covered only a surprisingly short distance. The map suggests significant progress. Your aching legs tell a different story. That night, there are no comfortable dugouts waiting. Instead, you and several others shelter inside a shell crater barely large enough for everyone to fit. The ground is frozen. Your blanket is damp. Somewhere in the darkness, artillery continues firing without interruption. One shell every few seconds. Hour after hour. It becomes almost impossible to remember what true silence sounds like. Over the following weeks, Verdun earns a terrible reputation among soldiers on both sides. The battle refuses to end. Ground gained during one attack is often lost during another. Entire hills change hands repeatedly. Every victory seems to demand another sacrifice. The veterans stop talking about winning quickly. Now they speak only about enduring. Surviving one more day, one more barrage, one more night beneath the endless thunder of the guns. As you stare across the shattered battlefield beneath another gray winter sky, you begin to understand why so many soldiers would later remember Verdun with a single phrase. Not as a battle, but as a place where the earth itself seemed determined to destroy everyone standing upon it. Just as the fighting around Verdun begins settling into another brutal stalemate, news arrives from farther north. The British and French have launched a massive offensive along the River Somme. For the ordinary German soldier, it hardly matters what name historians will eventually give the battle. What matters is that your regiment is ordered to move. Once again, you climb aboard crowded military trains. The familiar rhythm returns. Wooden benches, heavy backpacks, rifles stacked neatly beside tired soldiers. No one sings this time. Months at the front have changed everyone. The optimistic volunteers of 1914 have become seasoned veterans. They know that every transfer usually means one thing: more fighting. When you finally reach the Somme sector, the landscape immediately feels different from Verdun. Not because it has escaped destruction, because it hasn't. The countryside has been pounded so relentlessly by artillery that almost every landmark has disappeared. Entire villages exist only as piles of broken brick. Roads have become little more than muddy tracks winding between enormous shell craters. Even the trees seem to have vanished. Only blackened stumps remain. The trench you're assigned to is barely recognizable as a trench. Repeated shelling has collapsed large sections of the walls. Duckboards float in pools of muddy water. The dugouts are crowded with exhausted soldiers who have already spent weeks defending this position. One veteran greets your company with a tired smile. You picked a lovely place. His humor is dry, but everyone understands. Sometimes jokes are easier than complaints. On the morning after your arrival, the shelling begins. You've experienced artillery before. This feels different. The bombardment continues hour after hour without interruption. British guns fire from positions miles behind their own lines. The shells arrive in endless waves. Heavy shells, shrapnel shells, high explosives. Every few seconds another explosion shakes the trench. The earth trembles constantly. Loose dirt falls from the dugout, sealing onto your shoulders. The air grows thick with dust until breathing becomes difficult. Time almost loses its meaning. Minutes feel like hours. Hours blend into one another. Eventually, the shelling lifts. Not because it's over, because something else is beginning. The lookouts shout. Infantry. Carefully climbing onto the firing step, you look across no man's land. Far in the distance, long lines of British soldiers emerge from their trenches. Some walk steadily forward. Others spread out as they cross the shattered ground. Behind them, artillery continues falling farther behind the German lines, attempting to prevent reinforcements from arriving. The officers calmly begin issuing orders. Machine gun crews move into prepared positions. Riflemen check ammunition. Nobody shouts. The veterans have rehearsed moments like this countless times. The battle unfolds exactly as everyone feared. Machine guns open fire. Rifles crack in rapid succession. Artillery answers from both sides. The peaceful countryside disappears beneath smoke once again. The attack lasts for hours. Sometimes the enemy advances. Sometimes they're forced back. Neither side gains very much ground. By evening, no man's land is once again empty except for shattered equipment, broken barbed wire, and fresh shell craters. The battlefield looks even more scarred than it did that morning. That night, while helping repair another section of damaged trench wall, you overhear two older soldiers talking quietly. One simply says, "Verdun," he pauses, "was one kind of nightmare." He gestures toward the dark battlefield beyond the sandbags. The Somme is another. Neither man says anything else. There is nothing more to add. By now, you've begun understanding something that no newspaper back home could ever explain. The First World War isn't defined by one great battle. It's defined by endless endurance. One trench after another. One barrage after another. One exhausting day blending quietly into the next. And tomorrow morning, before sunrise, Stand To will begin once again, just as it always does. By 1918, the war has become something very different from what anyone imagined back in the summer of 1914. The excitement is gone. The optimism has disappeared. Even the landscape itself seems exhausted. The trenches are deeper. The shell craters larger. The villages behind the front are emptier than ever before. You notice the change not only at the front, imagined possible before the war. Aircraft have changed as well. What began as simple reconnaissance flights has become constant activity overhead. Fighters chase one another through the clouds, while observation aircraft quietly direct artillery fire below. The battlefield now stretches from deep underground to high above the sky. Yet perhaps the greatest change is one that cannot be seen. Morale. Letters arriving from home speak of shortages. Food has become increasingly scarce across Germany. Families wait in long lines for bread. Coal is difficult to find during winter. Even simple meals have become smaller than anyone remembers. The blockade has begun affecting nearly everyone. When fresh recruits arrive from home, they quietly confirm what the letters have already suggested. Life has become difficult everywhere, not only at the front. One evening, while sharing another simple meal of bread and thin soup, conversation turns toward the future. Nobody talks about victory anymore. Instead, they talk about peace. Not because anyone knows when it will come, because everyone hopes it cannot be too far away. The following morning begins like every other. Stand to before sunrise. Coffee substitute poured into metal cups. Another inspection of rifles and equipment. Another repair to another section of trench wall damaged by the previous day's shelling. The routines remain unchanged. But something feels different. The officers speak more quietly. The rumors grow stronger. Some say negotiations have begun. Others dismiss the stories entirely. After 4 long years of war, hope has become something soldiers are almost afraid to believe. Still, as you climb onto the firing step and look once more across the scarred landscape of no man's land, you cannot help wondering whether this endless routine might finally be approaching its end. Then, one cold morning in November, the rumors finally become impossible to ignore. They begin quietly, a whisper passing from one dugout to another. The officers have received news. Someone else claims that negotiations are taking place inside a railway carriage somewhere in France. Another insists the fighting will end within days. After years of false rumors, very few soldiers believe them. You've heard too many stories before. Too many promises that peace was just around the corner. So the trench carries on as usual. Stand to before dawn. Breakfast of dark bread and thin soup. Repairs to damaged duckboards. Cleaning rifles already worn smooth from years of service. Everything feels exactly the same. Until it doesn't. Late in the morning, your company commander gathers everyone inside the trench. His face is calm, almost relieved. He removes a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. For a moment, nobody speaks. Even the distant artillery seems strangely quieter than usual. Then he reads the order. An armistice has been signed. The fighting will cease at the 11th hour. On the 11th day of the 11th month, November 11th, 1918. The words hang in the air. No one moves. After 4 years of constant danger, it feels almost impossible to imagine a battlefield without gunfire. Several soldiers glance toward the enemy trench. It looks exactly as it did yesterday. The same sandbags, the same shattered trees, the same tangled barbed wire stretching across no man's land. Nothing has changed, except everything. As the morning slowly passes, the artillery continues firing. Not as heavily as before, but steadily. Many batteries have been ordered to continue until the final minute. No one wants to stop too early. You check your watch again and again. 10 o'clock. Then 11:30. 11:45. The minutes seem to crawl. Everyone waits. Some clean their rifles one last time. Others quietly smoke cigarettes while sitting against the trench wall. A few simply stare across the battlefield in silence. Then, your watch reaches 11. At first, nothing happens. One final artillery shell explodes. Somewhere far behind the lines. A distant machine gun rattles briefly. Then, silence. True silence. For the first time since arriving on the Western Front, you hear something you've almost forgotten. The wind. Birds calling from the few trees still standing. The quiet rustling of dry grass growing between shell craters. No artillery. No rifles. No whistles overhead. Only silence. It feels almost unreal. The soldiers look at one another. No cheering breaks out. No celebration fills the trench. Only quiet smiles. Exhausted smiles. Some remove their helmets and simply sit down. One older veteran closes his eyes for a long moment. Another lights a cigarette with trembling hands. Across no man's land, figures begin cautiously appearing above the enemy trench. British soldiers. French soldiers. They stand just as carefully as you do. Watching. Wondering. After years spent trying to survive one another, neither side quite knows what to do next. You realize that the war has not ended with one dramatic final battle. It has ended with silence. The silence you've dreamed about through endless nights of shell fire. The silence that seemed impossible only yesterday. As evening settles over the Western Front, no stand-to is ordered. For the first time in 4 long years, no one expects an attack before dawn. The rifles remain stacked neatly beside the dugout. The artillery remains quiet. And as you lie down beneath your blanket that night, you fall asleep to something almost forgotten. Perfect peace. The days following the armistice feel strangely unfamiliar. For 4 years, every morning began with the expectation that something might happen. A shell, a rifle shot, an order to move forward. Now, the mornings arrive quietly. The trenches remain occupied for a time, but the atmosphere has completely changed. Instead of repairing firing positions, soldiers begin packing equipment. Ammunition boxes are counted. Telephone wires are rolled up. Tools are carefully loaded onto wagons. The war that demanded so much for so long is slowly being dismantled. One piece at a time. Your company receives orders to leave the front several days later. There are no victory parades waiting. No bands playing triumphant marches. Then you remember. The war has reached every corner of the country, even those far from the front. When the train finally slows near your hometown, your heart begins beating faster than it has in months. You step down onto the platform, your pack suddenly feeling lighter than ever before. For a moment, you simply stand there. The station looks familiar, yet somehow smaller than you remembered. Then you see them, your family, waiting exactly where you hoped they would be. Your mother reaches you first. She says nothing. She simply wraps her arms around you. Your father follows, placing a firm hand on your shoulder before quietly smiling. No speeches are needed. The journey is over. Walking home through the familiar streets feels almost dreamlike. The bakery is still there. The church still stands in the center of town. Children still play in the square. Life has continued. Not unchanged, but continued. That evening, you sit at the same kitchen table you left more than 4 years ago. A warm meal waits before you. Real coffee fills your cup. Outside, the church bell rings softly across the town. For the first time in years, you hear it without the distant sound of artillery answering in return. The war is finally behind you. But you know, some part of the Western Front will always remain with you. If you've made it this far, then yes, you survived. You survived 4 years of one of the harshest wars the world had ever known. You survived the endless trenches stretching across France and Belgium. You survived the freezing winters, where even putting on your boots became a painful morning ritual. You survived the summer heat, the mud that clung to every step, the rats that seemed to outnumber the soldiers, and the lice that no amount of washing could ever completely remove. You survived the artillery that fell without warning, the poison gas drifting silently across no man's land, the sleepless nights spent listening for enemy patrols somewhere beyond the barbed wire. You survived, but as you slowly settle back into civilian life, you realize something. Survival is not the same as returning to the person who left home in 1914. The young man who boarded that train believed the war would be a brief adventure. He imagined marching proudly home before Christmas. He had never heard the sound of thousands of artillery guns firing together. He had never stood ankle-deep in freezing mud while waiting for dawn. He had never understood how valuable a warm meal or a dry pair of socks could truly be. The man sitting at the kitchen table now is different. Older, quieter, more patient. The war changed millions of people in ways that could never be measured by medals or promotions. Many veterans rarely spoke about what they had seen, not because they wished to forget, because some memories simply resisted words. Years pass. The trenches slowly disappear beneath grass and wildflowers. Rain fills the shell craters. Trees begin growing once more where forests had been reduced to splintered stumps. Nature, as it always does, quietly begins healing the land. Today, if you visit parts of the old Western Front, you can still find traces of those years. Fragments of trenches hidden beneath forests. Small cemeteries stretching across peaceful hillsides. Rows of white crosses standing quietly beneath open skies. Gentle reminders of ordinary young men whose lives became part of history. Looking back, perhaps the most surprising lesson isn't how battles were fought. It's how ordinary life continued despite them. Soldiers still laughed with friends, still wrote letters home, still shared the last piece of bread with the man beside them, still found moments of kindness in places where kindness seemed almost impossible. History often remembers the generals, the famous offensives, the dates printed in textbooks. But the First World War was carried, day after day, by millions of ordinary soldiers simply trying to make it through another sunrise. People, very much like you. People who missed home, who worried about their families, who dreamed about warm beds, fresh bread, and peaceful mornings. If you had truly been one of them, there is no guarantee you would have survived. Millions never did. And those who returned often carried the weight of those years for the rest of their lives. So as tonight's journey comes gently to an end, perhaps take a quiet moment to appreciate the ordinary comforts around you. A warm room, a comfortable bed, the peaceful silence outside your window, the simple freedom of knowing tomorrow will arrive without the sound of artillery. The young soldier who boarded a train in the summer of 1914 could never have imagined a world like yours. And perhaps that's the greatest reminder history can offer us. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I'm Sleepy War Doctor, and wherever you're listening from, I hope you sleep peacefully. Good night.